Welcome back, legends. Today we take a look at a player who was once misunderstood, but over time, he has gained a reputation as one of the fiercest competitors in all of sports. This is the real, unfiltered story of Jimmy Butler. Chapter 1: Origins and Childhood. Jimmy Butler was born on September 14, 1989, in a small town called Tomball, just outside of Houston, Texas. Jimmy's father abandoned him when he was just an infant, leaving his mother, Londa, on her own to raise Jimmy and his siblings. But Londa battled with addiction and was overwhelmed by her parenting duties. When Jimmy was just 13 years old, she kicked him out of the house. Apparently, she told him, "I don't like the look of you. You've got to go."
Breeds.
My mom kicked me out of my house, to tell the truth. I bounced in and out of guys' houses in high school.
And just like that, Jimmy was left to fend for himself. While some would call him homeless, Jimmy would tell you he doesn't like that term. He wasn't sleeping under a bridge or begging for food on a street corner. Instead, he turned to his classmates who would let him spend the night. Jimmy was a star athlete who was particularly excellent on the football field. He didn't like practicing under the hot sun in Houston, so for that reason, he decided to pursue basketball instead, where he could practice in an air-conditioned gym. While a senior in high school, another student named Jordan Leslie realized that Jimmy was bouncing around, finding different places to sleep. So he let Jimmy stay in his basement. Jimmy didn't want to get kicked out, so he tried to go completely unnoticed. Jordan would bring him dinner down to the basement where Jimmy would eat by himself and sleep. In his mind, if Jordan's parents never saw him, they would have no reason to kick him out. Jordan's mother, Michelle Lambert, was fully aware of what was going on, and over time began to develop a relationship with Jimmy. After getting to know him, she told him that he could stay as long as he wanted and invited him into the family. From then on, Michelle served as a mother figure, loving and supporting Jimmy throughout the rest of his life. On that note, we can't make any rest of your life promises, but if you subscribe to our channel right now, we will appreciate it for a very, very long time. Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Back to the story. Chapter 2: Recruitment. While living under the same roof, Jordan and Jimmy became great friends. Jimmy became the star of his high school team in Tomball, while Jordan excelled at football, eventually suiting up for the Cleveland Browns in the NFL. But Jimmy's game didn't exactly stand out to recruiters. He had athletic upside, but lacked the finesse to catch the eyes of any major programs. Instead, Jimmy attended Tyler Junior College in Tyler, Texas. There, he led the team in scoring, and Buzz Williams, the head coach for the Marquette Golden Eagles, came to one of his games to scout a player named Joe Fulces. But Buzz noticed Jimmy, who had a noticeable presence on the court. Jimmy was still just an 18-year-old kid, but Buzz wanted to give his attitude a test. He told him, "You suck." Jimmy claims he had no clue who the guy was and was a little taken back by the comment. But Buzz saw something in Jimmy that no one else did. By season's end, Jimmy was the 73rd ranked recruit in the state of Texas. So Buzz contacted Jimmy at 2 in the morning and offered him a scholarship. It was the only offer that Jimmy received to a Division I program. Jimmy immediately contacted his team's assistant coach, who advised him to sign the papers immediately before the offer was rescinded. He picked Jimmy up in the middle of the night and drove him to McDonald's, where he signed the document and faxed it back to Buzz Williams. At the time, Jimmy thought his dream had come true. Not because he was going to get NBA looks. No, that was still far from a realistic dream. But he was thrilled that he would get the opportunity to get a college degree covered by a basketball scholarship. Chapter 3: College Career at Marquette. When Jimmy Butler arrived at Marquette University, he arrived to a world of shock. Firstly, he was not expecting Wisconsin to be so dang cold. He arrived on campus for his first time on the first day of classes without a jacket. But what was more surprising than the weather was the treatment he received from his head coach, Buzz Williams. Buzz was stepping into his first year as the head coach of Marquette, and even though he was only a 2-star recruit, Buzz saw massive upside in Jimmy. He turned him into his special little development project. The truth is that Buzz Williams' love for Jimmy Butler was deep, but you would never know it by the way he treated him. Buzz pushed Jimmy to his limits. He pushed him way harder than he pushed any other player on his team. In fact, he pushed Jimmy so hard that Jimmy almost considered transferring to a new school. And it wasn't just physical. Buzz tapped into Jimmy's emotional triggers as well. He would say, "You can't guard this guy, Jimmy, you're not good enough," knowing full well that Jimmy would step up to the challenge. He wanted to figure out what Jimmy's limits were. But the more he pushed him, he realized that he had no limits. Jimmy was a different breed. In his first year at Marquette, Jimmy earned a role as a utility defender that would play relentless defense. He only scored 5.6 points per game, but his presence was intense. In his junior year, Jimmy became a starter on the team, leading the Golden Eagles in minutes, but attempted less shots than two of his teammates, Lazar Hayward and Darium Johnson-Odom. In his senior year, Butler took on an even bigger role, leading the team in minutes once again and becoming the team's second leading scorer. But even after earning his rank as a leader, Buzz still worked him harder than any other player. The Golden Eagles were forced to run sprints every morning at 5:30 and would run extra sprints before playing against stronger opponents. If they didn't finish fast enough, he would make them start all over again. Before playing Seton Hall, Jimmy ran so many sprints that he literally ran a hole right through the bottom of his shoe. He cautiously took his shoe off and jogged to the finish line. Buzz looked him square in the eye and told him that he took too long and had to start the sprints all over again. Some guys don't respond to tough love. Jimmy is far from one of those guys. He just got a new pair of shoes, strapped up, and started sprinting again. The Golden Eagles entered March Madness as an 11th seed, but they were galvanized by the toughness of their emotional leader, Jimmy Butler. Jimmy, along with Darius Johnson-Odom and Jay Crowder, led Marquette to an upset victory against 6th-seeded Xavier in the first round.
Marquette in their constant movement, constant penetration. Jimmy Butler
and then took down 3rd-seeded Syracuse in the round of 32. Jimmy proved himself as one of the best defensive prospects in the world. Chapter 4: Chicago Bulls. Going into the 2011 NBA draft, Jimmy Butler wasn't the most highly touted prospect. He was seen as a wing with limited offensive upside. But Tom Thibodeau, who was coaching the Chicago Bulls at the time, thought he would fit into the system seamlessly as a perimeter defender off the bench. So the Bulls drafted him with the 30th overall pick in the first round. Bulls fans were skeptical of the pick because they were hoping for a player that had more offensive skills. The Bulls were coming off a season in which they were bounced by the Miami Heat in the conference finals after winning 62 games in the regular season. They had a core consisting of Derrick Rose, who had just won the league MVP, as well as defensive stalwarts in Joakim Noah, Carlos Boozer, and Luol Deng. He only played in half the team's games and averaged 2.6 points in only 8.5 minutes per contest. But he worked hard and gained the respect of his peers along the way. In the playoffs, Derrick Rose suffered a devastating ACL tear that would force him out of the entire 2012-2013 season. Jimmy was one of the beneficiaries of the injury, who saw his minutes increase in his sophomore season. He didn't blow anyone away with offense, but he proved himself as a capable rotational piece, averaging 8.6 points per game in 26 minutes, while suiting up in all 82 games. During his sophomore year, a trainer named Chris Johnson began working with Jimmy and saw major upside in his abilities. Johnson told Butler, "Give me 2 years and I'll make you an all-star." So Jimmy committed to Johnson's training and saw massive results. In his 3rd season, Jimmy started for the Bulls at the shooting guard position and led the team with 38.7 minutes per game. He was also selected to the NBA's all-defensive second team for the first time in his career. He was offered a 4-year contract extension worth $44 million total. It was a hell of a lot of money, but Jimmy opted to reject the contract and play out his contract season. In his 4th season, under Coach Thibodeau, Jimmy had a breakout year, leading the Bulls with 20.9 points per game while adding 5.3 rebounds, 4.8 assists, and 1.6 steals. He was named an All-Star for the first time in his career and won the league's Most Improved Player award. In turn, he was rewarded with a $95 million contract extension. Unfortunately, the team wasn't trending in the same direction as Jimmy. Derrick Rose had returned from ACL surgery and was only a shell of his former self. Jimmy Butler was clearly the star of the team and seemed to be a perfect fit alongside Rose as a primary scorer that could take some pressure off of him defensively. But D. Rose was prideful and wasn't ready to hand the reins of the team over to Jimmy. And Joakim Noah, who was another leader in the Bulls locker room, was extremely close with Rose and wanted the team to prioritize his rehabilitation into the team's star over Jimmy's development. The divide, along with the team's inability to get back to the conference finals, led management to cutting ties with Thibodeau and bringing in Fred Hoiberg as the team's new head coach. And Hoiberg brought a much more laid-back and player-friendly approach to the Bulls. But that didn't jive with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy was the first to speak out, openly stating that Hoiberg needed to be more of a disciplinarian and take control of the room. He publicly told a media member, "I believe in the guys in this locker room, but I also believe we probably have to be coached a lot harder at times. I'm sorry. I know Fred is a laid-back guy, and I really respect him for that, but when guys aren't doing what they're supposed to do, you have to get on guys, myself included." At this point, Jimmy was obviously the best player on the team, but Rose and Noah weren't willing to admit it. The Bulls finished the season with a 42-40 record under Hoiberg and missed the playoffs for the first time in almost a decade. After the season, the Bulls traded Rose to the Knicks, and Joakim Noah followed him as a free agency. Management signed a 35-year-old Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo in an attempt to build a big three of their own. But things didn't work out. Wade's knees prevented him from performing up to the hopes of Bills fans, and the team finished 41-41. But in the playoffs, the team seemed to rise to the occasion. They took a 2-0 lead against the top-seeded Celtics before Rondo injured his thumb. The injury sucked the life out of the Bulls as the Celtics came firing back and eventually won the series in 6 games. Jimmy had a heck of a season, averaging 23.9 points per game, and was named an NBA All-Star for his 3rd consecutive season. At this point, though, he had grown sick and tired of Hoiberg's approach to coaching. With 2 years remaining on his contract, he demanded that he get out of Chicago. The Bulls granted his wish by trading him to the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he would be reunited with coach Tom Thibodeau, and in return the Bulls received Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and the 7th overall pick in the 2017 draft. Chapter 5. Jimmy Butler's father. One of Jimmy Butler's biggest influences and closest friends may surprise you. During his sophomore season, actor Mark Wahlberg walked into a Bulls practice facility looking to play a game of pickup basketball. Jimmy Butler happened to be practicing at the time, and the two men hit it off. Jimmy was far from a star player at the time, and claims he was starstruck as soon as he saw Wahlberg. Wahlberg had rented out an entire bowling alley to watch a boxing match that same evening and invited Jimmy to join the party. He did, and they connected on a deep personal level immediately. After the party, they exchanged phone numbers, but Jimmy was shy to reach out. But a couple weeks later, he checked in to see how Wahlberg was doing. Wahlberg told him the next time he's in LA to reach out, and he was welcome to his house. So, Jimmy did, and over time they became great friends. Deeper than friends, actually. Wahlberg is somewhat famous for his routine of waking up extremely early and doing intense workouts to start the day. Wahlberg influenced Jimmy to do the same, and he credits Wahlberg for inspiring him to follow the traits that have allowed him to rise to stardom. Now, Wahlberg serves as a father figure and role model to Jimmy Butler. After signing his first big contract, Wahlberg was the first to congratulate Jimmy and throw him a massive party at his home. But would you believe it if I told you there are rumors that Jimmy Butler's real biological father is someone even more famous than the renowned actor who starred in Boogie Nights? Alright, legends, we usually don't do this here. This channel takes pride in gathering factual information to give you reliable details about your favorite athletes' careers. So, if you're into that type of thing, please take a moment to subscribe to Legends Media to keep up with all the great videos that we are going to provide you with in the future. But for now, we're going to share with you a crazy rumor that went absolutely viral on TikTok and spread across the internet like wildfire. The rumor is that Jimmy Butler's real father is the one and only Michael Jordan. Alright, we know, it sounds crazy, and it most likely is just fabricated nonsense. But still, let's just look at some of these details. It all started in February 2016. The self-proclaimed king of all sports media, Terez Owens, said he received an anonymous tip. This tip claimed that Jordan was indeed Butler's father. The rumor goes on to explain that Michael Jordan got a woman pregnant in 1988 with the last name Butler. But obviously at the time, if the details went public, it would drastically tarnish MJ's reputation. The rumor goes on to say that Jordan paid the woman off for years and stopped making payments right when Jimmy was kicked out of his mother's home at age 13. Jordan didn't play a game in Houston 9 months before Butler's birth, but he did play a game in Dallas. And Jordan, who is known to be a bit of a party animal, could have easily made a drive down to Houston, where they have some of the craziest nightlife in the United States. Additionally, MJ and Butler look eerily similar, and if any player embodies the competitive spirit and relentlessness of Jordan, it is most definitely Butler. Is there truth to the rumor? It's unlikely, but it got so much attention on social media that we thought it was worth sharing. But enough about rumors, let's get back to Jimmy's basketball career. Chapter 6, Minnesota Timberwolves. When Jimmy Butler arrived in Minnesota, it seemed like a match made in heaven. Tom Thibodeau, who had previously had a great relationship with Jimmy, was the head coach, and the team had 2 young first overall picks on the roster in Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. Unfortunately, there was one major issue. Jimmy hated Karl Anthony Towns from day one. Towns and Butler had polar opposite personalities. Towns had been a prodigy ever since his high school days. He entered college as the 2nd-ranked prospect in the entire country. At 7 feet tall, Towns had offensive skills that made scouts drool. He had every college coach in the country bending over backwards in an attempt to persuade the 18-year-old to join their program. Towns committed to coaching legend John Calipari and the University of Kentucky Wildcats. There, he spent 1 year alongside other top prospects, such as Devin Booker, where he was touted as a generational talent. After only losing 1 game all year long, the Wildcats were knocked out of March Madness by the Wisconsin Badgers. Towns was drafted 1st overall by the Timberwolves, where some of his downfalls became apparent. The skill was clearly there, but he lacked work ethic and discipline for a professional athlete. He was overweight, but didn't seem to care. He was a nice kid that had a bit of an inflated ego and a sense of entitlement. It wasn't abnormal for a young player that had already been treated like a king throughout his adolescence. However, it completely contrasted with Butler's attitude and philosophies. Jimmy wanted to see better performance from his team. In late November, Jimmy Butler got extremely animated on a flight to New Orleans. He went off on his fellow players in an attempt to get his teammates to raise their work ethic, effort, and defensive approach. Late in the season, Butler was forced to miss 17 games due to injury. During that time, the Wolves went 8-9 and put themselves at risk of missing the playoffs. However, Jimmy returned for the last 3 games of the season, in which the team went 3-0. A trend was there. Games Butler was not present for were games not won. Jimmy didn't exactly have a tight friendship with his teammates, and he needed his teammates to step up and get on the same page. The last game was an overtime thriller, in which Jimmy willed his team over the Denver Nuggets in overtime to earn the final playoff spot on the last day of the regular season. The Wolves were matched up against the Houston Rockets and went down 3-1 in the series. Between games 4 and 5, Butler went public again, this time questioning his teammates in Minnesota. He told reporters, "I put so much into this game and I only play to win. I don't play for any individual stats or accolades, and at times I get lost in how everybody is not built the way that I'm built. Sometimes I just look around and I don't understand how or why you all don't love to get better the way that I do." The next game, the Wolves got annihilated by the Rockets as Clint Capella dominated Karl Anthony Towns on both ends of the floor. Following the game, Jimmy did not fly back to Minnesota with his teammates. Instead, he bought his own flight back to Los Angeles by himself and refused to participate in team medical exams that all players go through as part of their exit interviews. During the offseason, Jimmy let it be known that he wasn't going to sign a contract extension anytime soon with the Timberwolves. It wasn't a real surprise. If he played out the season, he could set himself up to earn more money by NBA rules. Jimmy told the front office that he was fed up with the team's nonchalant attitude, particularly that of Karl Anthony Towns. He demanded that the team make significant roster and attitude adjustments if he were to come back and play for them again the next season. Not just that, but he also wanted the Wolves to make roster moves that would enable them to offer Butler a longer max contract at season's end under the rules of the CBA. The Wolves didn't seem to take Jimmy's demands seriously. They didn't make significant changes to the roster and offered him a $110 million contract extension. It was the most they could offer him at the time, and Jimmy rejected it. He also went to his coach, Tom Thibodeau, and demanded a trade out of Minnesota. He made his demands public, and fans' perception of him began shifting. Since this was his second trade demand in as many years, fans and media painted Jimmy as a player with attitude issues and a bad teammate. But still, the Wolves wouldn't pull the trigger on a trade. When training camp began in September, all the players showed up, but Jimmy was nowhere to be seen. Then, on October 10th, 1 week before the season, Jimmy showed up to practice. He didn't say hi to anyone. While players were chit-chatting and shooting around, Jimmy was stretching by himself, completely silent. Thibodeau gathered the team and told them to run a scrimmage. He wanted the starters, Jimmy Butler, Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Jeff Teague, and Taj Gibson, to play on one team. But Jimmy interrupted. He said, "I'm not playing with those guys, I'm playing with these guys." Thibodeau obliged. He threw Derrick Rose, a player that Butler had a tumultuous past with, in with the starters, and allowed Jimmy to play with his group of Bad News Bears. Right off the jump, Jimmy yelled, "I've got Cat." As soon as Towns got the ball, Butler stripped him of it and took it down the court for a basket. Jimmy yelled, "Get the out of here, he's trash." On the next possession, Towns scored the ball and started taunting back. "He's too small, he can't guard me." But then Jimmy Butler exploded. He completely took the game over, playing defense, setting up teammates, and dunking. Meanwhile, he was yelling at the top of his lungs at the coaching staff and general manager. "Pay me, pay me." When the game was done, Jimmy's team won 18-6. Then he ripped off his warm-up uniform and showed he was wearing a Wolves jersey, but with the Minnesota logo cut out of it, showing off his bare chest. He continued screaming at the GM, "You guys think you can win without me? I just beat your starters with a bunch of G-Leaguers. You fucking need me. You can't win without me. Pay me, pay me." Then he ran out of the practice facility and was at home before anyone could talk to him or get a rematch. When he got home, he met journalist Rachel Nichols at his house for an interview an hour after practice, in which he told her exactly what just happened. Meanwhile, his Wolves teammates were left watching the interview together at the practice facility. The fiasco was one of the most iconic practice moments in NBA history, and reports flooded social media about what really transpired. Needless to say, Jimmy Butler's time with Minnesota didn't last long after the incident. 10 games into the season, the Wolves traded Butler for an underwhelming package, including Robert Covington, Dario Saric, Jared Bayless, and second-round picks to the Philadelphia 76ers for the remainder of his contract. Jimmy sure tarnished his reputation in Minnesota, but his antics pale in comparison to what Ja Morant pulled on the Memphis Grizzlies. And if you're interested in the real, unfiltered story about what really happened with Ja Morant, check out the video we made on his career. Or keep hanging with us here while we continue our deep dive into Jimmy Butler's story. Chapter 7, Philadelphia 76ers. When Jimmy showed up to Philadelphia, he knew he had gained a reputation as one of the NBA's biggest villains. In his heart, he didn't believe that he was a bad guy at all. He was extremely coachable and had a great work ethic. He was far from selfish, but his biggest priority was to win. The 76ers had a roster that already consisted of young stars, including Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. In some ways, Jimmy was expected to play the same role he played in Minnesota. But there were some significant differences as well. The big difference was the presence of Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons was the designated point guard, and all offense began with him as a facilitator. It made sense, since his lack of shooting along with the presence of Joel Embiid inside made him ineffective while playing off the ball in the defense. But the system didn't exactly play into Jimmy's strengths. If Jimmy Butler has one weakness in his game, it's his three-point shooting, which is what the 76ers needed to surround Embiid and Simmons with. However, it was Jimmy's contract year, and he just needed to go about his business and do his job as well as he could. But Jimmy quickly started noticing a pattern in Philadelphia. The team's head coach, Brett Brown, would invite players in to watch video, and all the players remained silent throughout the entire session. Then, after the session, the players and coaches would disperse with barely any communication regarding strategy. And a lot of the players would complain about the team's one-dimensional offense that only allowed Ben Simmons to handle the rock, but none of them would dare to speak up to Brett Brown. Things didn't change, and Jimmy began to perceive the lack of communication as a major issue. Eventually, he decided to take initiative and speak up on behalf of his fellow players to his coach at practice. Jimmy got in a heated discussion with Brett Brown, saying that a lot of the players think that the offense lacks creativity and that it could be more effective if they began working some new plays into it. Brown was like, "Oh yeah? What do you guys think of this?" No one backed up Butler. Jimmy turned around and the first player he made eye contact with was TJ McConnell, so he blurted out, "TJ said we should run more pick and roll."
Mavericks, it's their first game since a report surfaced that Jimmy Butler is having issues with Brett Brown about his role in the 76ers offense.
Once again, to the media at the practice, it looked like Butler was causing problems, and one journalist reported that Butler was now feuding with his new head coach. Following the incident, Brett Brown was defiant and continued to run the offense with Simmons as the primary playmaker on every possession that he was on the court. At the trade deadline, the 76ers GM Elton Brand acquired a forward named Tobias Harris from the Clippers. Harris and Butler played similar positions, and even had some similarities in their game. Harris was 6'8" and could guard almost any position. He was extremely skilled on offense, and was a much more natural shooter than Butler. For that reason, he fit alongside Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid extremely well as a spot-up three-point shooter who could create his own shot when needed. But come playoff time, Brett Brown shocked the team by finally changing up the offense. Jimmy Butler got what he wanted and became the go-to ball handler on offense. And in turn, Ben Simmons was put in an awkward position. For the first time all year, he was expected to play off the ball. Ben Simmons was upset and a little lost at times on offense, and Butler is the first to say that it was justified. Jimmy has gone on to say that they made these switches during the regular season when he first suggested it to the coach. Simmons would have been more prepared and equipped to play in a secondary offensive role come playoff time. The change in strategy was actually what began the disconnect between Simmons and the 76ers that eventually led to his trade demand years later. As for the 2019 76ers, once Jimmy Butler had the ball in his hands, the team started clicking. They beat the Brooklyn Nets in the first round 4-1. Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler had great chemistry, and things were as bright as ever in the city of brotherly love. In the second round, the 76ers matched up against a dominant Toronto Raptors team led by Kawhi Leonard. Both teams were built on fierce defense, and the series was an absolute dogfight for the ages. After going down 3-2, Jimmy led the way with 25 points to take the series to Game 7. And Game 7 was one of the craziest games in NBA history. The score was 90-90, with seconds remaining when Kawhi Leonard took a buzzer beater, off-balance fadeaway while running towards the baseline. He couldn't have been defended much better. The ball bounced on every part of the rim before falling through the bucket, seemingly in slow motion. And that was it. Right when the team was finally coming together and playing their best basketball, they were eliminated with one shot. The Raptors went on to win the NBA title, and as the emotions settled, Jimmy realized that he might have just played his last game with the 76ers. He was no longer under NBA contract and had the freedom to sign with the team of his choice. He did love playing with Joel Embiid in Philadelphia, but he didn't know if the 76ers were going to prioritize bringing him back. In retrospect, it seems crazy to not bring back a player like Butler, but at the time, there were a lot of question marks surrounding him. Like, did he have an attitude problem? And how could he fit in with Ben Simmons as the point guard? The decision came down to Elton Brand. Brand's first decision was to keep Brett Brown as the head coach. After that was finalized, he asked Brown a vital question. Can you control Jimmy Butler? When Jimmy got wind of what Brand had asked, he decided to make the decision easy. He said, "I'm a grown man. No one can control me." So Butler made the decision to sign a 4-year contract worth $142 million in a sign and trade deal that would make him the new star of the Miami Heat. Meanwhile, the 76ers decided to move forward with Ben Simmons and Brett Brown. They signed Tobias Harris to a 5-year contract worth $180 million because they thought he was the better fit than Jimmy long-term in Philly. Chapter 8: Miami Heat. Jimmy Butler was persuaded to join the Miami Heat by a group of reputable champions. One of his first connections to the organization was Dwayne Wade, who Butler played with during his last season in Chicago. Wade knew what Butler was all about and believed that he would be a perfect fit in Miami. Jimmy had conversations with team president Pat Riley and head coach Eric Spoelstra. They delivered an extremely consistent message that the Heat have a culture that prioritizes winning and hard work over all else. Each and every year, the team is playing to win a championship. It's all about the present season, not about 3 years or 5 years down the line. Players are expected to show up to work and be professional. No nonsense, no drama, just consistent hard work. Jimmy was sold. It was all he was looking for. At his first press conference, a lot of the questions thrown at Jimmy were about his attitude and the controversies that had followed him throughout his entire career. And he was quick to defend himself with his version of the truth. He told the media, "I think I'm a little extra at times. I don't think there's too much wrong with that either. If you do what I do every day and other people don't go about it that way, I think you might have a problem with it too. I love my job, I love the game, I love to work. I'm at it every single day and hours at a time when people don't want to do it. So I think, why doesn't everybody do what I do? And to this day, I just don't understand it. I really don't. Will I ever understand it? Probably not. There's a lot of stuff that's out there. It's just how deep you want to read into it. I don't think that I'm that bad of a guy. I'm not an asshole like everybody thinks that I am. Some people talk a big talk, but can't back it up. Jimmy Butler quickly proved he was not one of those guys in Miami. He quickly became the leader of a group that consisted of young players like Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro, as well as solidified veterans like Goran Dragic. Jimmy quickly became the leader of the team, and the rest of the group rallied behind him. Jimmy was finally able to settle in and show what kind of person he was in the right environment. The Heat outworked their opponents while having fun. They quickly gained notoriety for their unique culture, which was personified by Jimmy Butler. The Heat weren't the favorites in the East, but they were right in the mix. At the deadline, they acquired Andre Iguodala, a proven champion in the twilight of his career, as well as Jimmy's teammate from college, Jay Crowder. But as the season came winding down, one of the most unusual situations broke out in the history of sports: the pandemic. The season was put on hold while the players went back to their families. Eventually, the NBA regrouped in Orlando for the famous bubble playoff. Those within the bubble were not allowed to leave until they were eliminated, and those outside of the bubble were not allowed to enter. It was like a weird combination of NBA and Survivor that didn't only test players' skills, but also their mental fortitude. As time went on, some players were opening up about mental health struggles that affected their play. There were no breaks, no going home, no unwinding. But what caused stress and friction for some teams ignited Jimmy Butler and the Heat. Jimmy was built for this. He wanted to prove he was mentally stronger than his opponents.
15 for Butler.
He had been away from home since he was 13 years old, so the unique circumstances didn't bother him the same way it impacted others. He thrived. In the bubble, Jimmy opened up a coffee shop, which he called Big Face Coffee, which today is now a multi-million-dollar brand. There, he sold coffees for $20 per cup. He knew the other players in the bubble could afford it, and he was the only person who brought proper equipment to make high-quality coffee. He was having fun, making jokes, and dominating. In the first round, the Heat thumped the Indiana Pacers 4-0. In the second round, Jimmy and the Heat blasted the top-seeded Milwaukee Bucks 4-1.
Talking about into October, Butler, vicious.
They rolled over Boston in the conference finals before going head-to-head with LeBron James and the LA Lakers in the finals. Butler's tenacious play, leadership, and clutch performances earned him the nickname Playoff Jimmy. Although the Heat lost to the LA Lakers in 6 games, Butler's performance was nothing short of historic. In Game 3 of the 2020 NBA Finals, Butler recorded a 40-point triple-double, becoming only the 3rd player in Finals history to achieve this feat, joining the ranks of Jerry West and LeBron James. The loss was devastating, but by the time the bubble was finished, the perception of Jimmy had completely changed. He quickly earned the respect and love of fans around the country. He continued to build his legacy over the following seasons with the Heat. Jimmy continuously outworks opponents on both ends of the court and is the first to make jokes about himself or his teammates in press conferences. All of a sudden, everyone loves Jimmy. In 2021-22, Jimmy saw his points average rise from 21.4 in the regular season to 27.4 in the playoffs. The Heat won 2 series before getting ousted by the Celtics in the conference finals. In the 2022-23 regular season, the Heat struggled mightily, but Jimmy stayed focused and confident the entire time. After securing the 8th seed during the play-in tournament, the Heat matched up against the Milwaukee Bucks. And guess what? The Heat thumped them, winning the series 4-1. It was only the 3rd time an 8th seed beat a 1st seed in a 7-game playoff series. Jimmy continued by leading a team that consisted of 3 undrafted players as regulars in the rotation over the New York Knicks and then the Boston Celtics. Jimmy once again saw his scoring production increase from 22.9 points in the regular season to 26.9 points in the playoffs. Eventually, they lost in the finals to a dominant Nuggets squad, but not before Jimmy Butler silenced the critics who believed that he was past his prime. Playoff Jimmy is a real thing. Look at the stats. In his career, he averaged 18.2 points in the regular season, but 21.3 points in the playoffs. He also averages more assists, more rebounds, more steals, more blocks, and a higher three-point shooting percentage come playoff time. The truth is that Jimmy Butler's ability to shift into a new gear when it matters most is extremely unique and quite remarkable. but I guess it makes a little more sense when you look at the story and the obstacles he overcame along the way. As a member of the Miami Heat, Jimmy Butler has successfully changed the narrative of his entire career and the public perception. He's not only a shoo-in for the NBA Hall of Fame, but he's also become famous for being one of the funniest and most lovingly genuine personalities in the league. The only thing left on his bucket list is to win a championship before the clock ticks midnight on his career, and if his past is any indication, we wouldn't bet against him.